We all get some songs to choose before we launch to space, so it was a very surreal and bizarre moment to be sitting on top of 300 tons of rocket fuel, listening to Queen and U2 and Coldplay. Tim and I are not sure how so much Lady Gaga got onto the playlist either. We suspect that was a little joke by our Russian instructor. But before we knew it, the final countdown by Europe was playing, which is the traditional Russian song. And I was surprised actually at just how quickly after that song stopped. We were literally 1 minute from launch, and it was a case of, okay, stop, refocus, we're about to go into space. And so the launch sequence started. Now, going into space on a rocket, I can only describe it as that very overused adjective, awesome. The first stage that I spoke about, just 300 tons of rocket fuel, delivering 3 million horsepower, and that is all about getting all of that massive rocket up to about 60-70 kilometers in space. It's pure power. And as that stage, as the fuel burns off and the rocket gets lighter and lighter and lighter, as those first stage rocket boosters here get more and more empty, the acceleration builds and builds and builds. So you're sitting there, the rocket is vibrating, you can hear the noise. It's not as loud as for the people who are watching it outside, of course, but you can hear the noise building and the acceleration building. And towards the end of that first stage, you're probably doing about 3.5 to 4 Gs of acceleration going up. It's the most exhilarating feeling ever. And then all of a sudden, those 4 boosters get jettisoned and there's a big jolt through the rocket. And now we're into the second stage here. So we've lost those boosters. And the second stage is all about getting you up out of the atmosphere. So it takes you from about 60 kilometers up to about 120 kilometers. And actually I'm surprised at the second stage how smooth it was. You're doing about 2 Gs throughout the entire second stage, and it's just really a very smooth ride going vertically upwards. And this was the time that anybody who was in the Science Museum back watching the launch, and I was able to give a little thumbs up. That thumbs up was during this second stage where we're going through a number of checks and drills inside the capsule there. You probably wouldn't have got me doing a thumbs up in the first stage or the third stage, because that was a significantly different experience. But so the second stage there jettisons at about 120 kilometers. Now we're into the third stage. We're out of the atmosphere at this point, so you can see at the very end of the second stage the rocket looks a bit different because we've lost the nose fairing. As soon as you get outside of Earth's atmosphere, you don't need that nose fairing anymore. You're not experiencing any drag, and so get rid of it, jettison it. And that's the first time that I was able to look to the right outside of my Soyuz window, and you actually see the sky's not blue anymore, but the sky is black, and you're starting to approach that blackness of space. The third stage is all about raw power, foot to the floor acceleration, probably from about 4 times the speed of sound up to a crazy 25 times the speed of sound. And to put that into perspective, that's 10 times the speed of a bullet. And it's just the most amazing feeling. You're thinking to yourself, when's it going to stop? When's it going to stop? It can't go on for this long. 4 Gs pinned into your seat, just getting faster and faster and faster. And I have to say, it's probably the most addictive and the most fun adrenaline rush I have ever had in my life. If I could do a Soyuz rocket launch this afternoon, I would jump at the chance. It's the most amazing feeling.
Tim, let me ask you about you said it was smooth, but I hear that some of the Soyuz rockets are pretty clunky old technology. I mean, were there any nasty bangs that got you worried or anything like that?
There are very big bangs and jolts. You're right. The burning of the engines was smoother than I expected. The first stage is probably where it vibrates the most because you just got so much power, 3 million horsepower. But the other stages are fairly smooth. But as each of these stages are jettisoned, you're right. It's solid Russian technology blowing itself apart, and it's pyrotechnic bolts and it's big jolts as one set of engines stop and another set of engines start again. And in particular, when this third stage cuts out, it's a huge jolt because you're getting a massive acceleration. You've got virtually no fuel left. This thing is very light, but it's still packing a huge punch. And so when the main engine cuts out after 8 minutes 48 seconds, and then suddenly we have a huge jolt forward in the seats, and that's the moment we're injected into orbit at about 220 kilometers, and that's when everything just floats, and it's really the most surreal experience.
So what does that acceleration feel like? I mean, can you breathe okay? Do you lose consciousness? Or?
No, not at all. You can breathe okay, and unlike in fighter jets, where all the acceleration, when you go into a loop or a tight turn in a fighter jet, then it's the acceleration is in this axis. We call it the z-axis. Z-axis. Get rid of my Americanisms. Whereas in the spacecraft, we are lying back in the seat, so the acceleration is in the x-axis through the chest, which means that the blood is not draining from our heads, but it is like an elephant sitting on your chest. So it's harder to breathe, but you don't lose consciousness. So yeah, 220 kilometers, third stage cuts out, and then everything starts floating, and we're injected into orbit. We launched at about 5:30, I think, at night in Baikonur, which meant that because we're going eastwards, because that's the direction of our orbit, we're going into night. So within about 5 minutes of being injected into orbit, we started entering into the night cycle. And the first thing I remember seeing outside the window was this beautiful moonrise, which really caught me by surprise just how stunning it was. We have just 4 hours to rendezvous and dock with the International Space Station. 6 hours. We're about 4 orbits of planet Earth. Yeah, 6 hours to the space station, which, thinking about my flight back to Houston tomorrow, which is probably going to take about 10 hours, it's quite remarkable to think that I can get from Kazakhstan to the International Space Station in just 6 hours. So yes, an hour and a half per orbit, so 4 times around the planet. Now, we're quite busy during that time. We have to get from 220 kilometers. Firstly, we have to make sure that everything went okay on launch and the engines burnt as they should have done. Sometimes they don't quite burn as long as they should, and so we have to do some adjustments. We have to circularize the orbit. We have to raise the orbit from 220 kilometers up to 400 kilometers, and we have to make sure in a good configuration then to rendezvous and dock with the space station. So 6 hours sounds like a long time, but really we're busy inside the cockpit, or inside the spacecraft rather, and that time goes very, very quickly. And before we know it, we're in this configuration, which is approach the space station and getting ready now to dock. So we started our first docking, and we were kind of going from day into night, and the automatic system had a bit of a problem.
A bit of a problem. Houston, not Houston, but we have a problem.
Yes, yeah.
Was that at all disturbing?
It was disturbing because it happened so close to the space station, and nobody had ever experienced a failure that close. Normally, I mean, it's not uncommon for the automatic docking system to fail and for the crew to have to take manual control of the spacecraft. But normally, if that's going to happen, you have a problem well in advance, maybe 200 kilometers away, and so you're already well prepared. Thankfully, there's 2 helicopter pilots on board, in me and Tim, and Yuri, the most experienced, or one of the most experienced Russian cosmonauts they get. We fly with the attitude of something will go wrong. It's just a matter of when is it going to go wrong. Because when you fly helicopters for a number of years, you realise that something is going to go wrong. So you're always expecting something to go wrong. But it did take us by surprise. We're only 17 meters away from the space station, so we're really very close. And then suddenly, a abort sequence happened. We moved back quite aggressively from the space station, and then we found ourselves back out at 90 meters away from the space station. So Yuri took manual control of the spacecraft at this point, and then started flying it in. But it was a huge challenge because the lighting conditions were appalling. The low sun, as we went from day to night, we're crossing the terminator, so the sun is reflecting back on the periscope. Really, we couldn't see much at all. And to make matters worse, our docking port was right next to a recently arrived Cygnus spacecraft. So this is the solar panel from Cygnus, one of the solar panels, one either side. So we literally have to dock within, we have no room to maneuver either side of the Soyuz, and the Soyuz, of course, has its own solar panel, so very close proximity. And the first manual docking, with all those problems, was not going to plan at all. And so Yuri, thankfully, with his vast experience, was able to stop the approach, back off, reassess the problem, try and wait for the lighting conditions to improve, and we brought it back in for a third docking attempt, which was absolutely textbook. So before we knew it, a little bit later than expected, and I apologise to anybody who was waiting for the delay, but we were certainly in good spirits. and we joined the rest of the crew, and we brought the International Space Station crew up to 6, and the beginning of Expedition 46 to the International Space Station. So we joined Sergei Volkov, Scott Kelly, and Misha Kornienko, and of note, Scott and Misha were 9 months into their year-long stay at this point, which is quite remarkable to spend a year living in space. But they were absolutely great spirits. They were in great physical condition, great psychological condition, and it just proved to me how, you know, we really have mastered already the long-term effects of microgravity on the human body in terms of physiology and psychology. We still have some other challenges to overcome in terms of technology, but in terms of humans living in space, they were a fantastic example to what we can achieve.
But, I mean, seeing the pictures as I did of the ISS, 6 of you, it seemed you were crammed together. Were you actually crammed together? Could you get your own time, your own hand time?
Absolutely. This is probably in one of the more cramped modules. This is the Russian service module that you're looking at here. And there's a galley table just behind Tim. We would often on Friday evenings, this is where we would come and socialise and get together and talk about the week and just have some fun together on a Friday night. But that's one of the more cramped places, but the actual space station is the size of a 747. So there is plenty of space when 6 crew members are dispersed amongst that during the normal working day. It's not cramped at all.